Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about our foibles in college. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was really good. We're kind of settling back into our routine, and the girls started music lessons this week, which I was very concerned they would not like, but they were excited about. But then last night, there was a substitute teacher in my youngest daughter's class, and I guess she was really mean, it was just the end of the universe. So it's like it's just very weird. It's kind of weird hearing about, because the stuff she's describing is basically just how teachers were back in my day. Do you know what I mean? So partly you're like, okay, I'm glad it's not like that anymore. But anyway, it was very high drama. So it kind of, two things made me appreciate how nice the other teachers are the rest of the time. And then, I'm glad so we went in today and my daughter was really like, I'm not going if she's there, and she wasn't there and the old teacher was back. So
good.
All was well. But it was just, I think that all teachers should be appreciated, but teachers have young minds and the power they have, because all of these kids, like all of the parents were texting and everyone was melting down, and all these kids were refusing to go to bed, and just everyone was losing their minds. And I was like, wow, that was one day of this, person. And it's crazy when you think about the power of a teacher at that age, because that's the only person, because like in college, or you can have a mean professor, but it's not your whole world. Right. So anyway, I think it's really nice that that's not the norm. So that's something to be grateful for. But just, I think good primary school or elementary school teachers should be paid $1 million every day, basically. So that's me. But how was your week?
My week was good. We're kind of settling into our sabbatical mode in Los Angeles, which is where we are right now. And one thing that I was thinking about recently is like, I don't know. So one of the things I've been so excited about with sabbatical mode is just the schedule kind of opening up, you don't have all these meetings and classes scheduled at certain times and all that. And so one of the challenges that arose from that is I was like, well, what is the time to work on whatever project I'm trying to work on? And then that was a surprisingly large challenge when it's such a free thing. But anyway, the solution that has recently presented itself that I'm really excited about is like, well, whenever, just like start working on it. It doesn't have to be the time. Just start, if something comes up while I'm working on it, I just decide, do I want to pause and work on this thing that came up, or am I busy working on the project? Don't worry about whether it's the right time. Just start working on it, and if something comes up, deal with that when it comes up. So don't worry about the potential for an interruption or the potential that it's not the perfect time. And I don't know. So it feels really free. And I feel like as I'm saying it, it sounds really, I don't know, really like when I realized it, I was like, it's kind of obvious, but I hadn't realized it. Like, it's one of those things that's obvious once you realize it, but it wasn't obvious to me until I realized it,
No, but and we're so restricted and everything is so scheduled. It can be a bit, it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, I was reading about something called intuitive eating, which is basically if you just take away all the restrictions, you're just going to figure it out, and you'll eat, you know what I mean? And it's fine. And this sort of reminds me, I want to hear more about how this goes for you over time, because, it's what the dream, like, I just wish I didn't have any restrictions. And then when you don't, it's like, it's a bit overwhelming, and like, how do you structure things or whatever? So I'm dying to hear, because I bet you're going to be super productive and everything is going to be, you'll just get into a flow of just doing things intuitively that you want to work on, or the right thing at the right time. And I want to hear it. Yeah, I'm excited to hear how that goes.
I'll report back later once I've tried this out a little longer.
Good.
So, do you have a quote for us today?
I do, and it's sort of like a second order quote. So it's I don't think I'm using that in the right way. But anyway, as I have shared on here, I'm absolutely obsessed with For All Mankind. And I'm nearing the end of the third season. I actually don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
Oh, no.
I mean, I guess I'll just go back to the beginning. That's
That's a
the
good
obvious
idea.
answer.
Good solution, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's some things in the show that are so subtle that I think, like, I didn't realize until whatever, a certain point, I was like, wait, they're all using email, but it's the 80s.
Oh.
But I think, like, part of it is that they, you know, all of these technological things have been advanced. So anyway, so I think I will watch it. But at the end of season 2, one of the characters quotes John Lennon. So that's what I mean. It's not, anyway. So the quote is, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. And that, to me, is very lovely. Mm-hmm. And I like it. And it's a little, like, at first I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But then, like, as a doomsayer, I'm like, no, I don't think so. But then sometimes in the midst of stuff, it can just feel so bad, or things just feel like they're never going to get better. Mm-hmm. And then just the idea of sometimes recognizing that you're in the middle of the storm and it's not, this isn't the landing point. Do you know what I mean? I
love that.
And so that can be helpful.
That's lovely. And storms, I mean, storm's a great analogy, because when you're in the storm, it's really scary and you don't know, is there a tree going to fall on the house? And like, it's maybe the worst storm you've ever had. But then looking back, it maybe is just a epic story of that big storm. And, you know, it's like not a big deal.
And even Sive last night, like for her, this was like, this is just the new way school is, and I hate it, and I'm never going. And then this morning, once we found out that her teacher's back, it was like, oh, that was just a blip that happened. Right, it's fine. And it's just, yeah. But for last night, she was really upset because it was like, you know, anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It was huge in the moment, but hopefully in retrospect, it'll be smaller.
Right, and it's just going to become a thing about the day we had that mean teacher, and that's, So I feel like this came up, I can't entirely remember how, but we were thinking about, you know, kind of some things that we do deliberately because they were things that were issues for us as students. And then just kind of even expanding that out a little bit into just what were our hard things as students and what was our kind of academic story.
Yes.
And I'm assuming yours was you just came in knowing you were going to be a chemistry professor and everything went really smoothly from day one until now. Yeah. So is that, because that's going to be a short episode.
Yeah, it was really, you know, straightforward. No. Yeah, exactly. So we were kind of thinking about what were the challenges that we ran into as students ourselves. And then, reflecting on, are we already doing some things to try to help students not have those problems? Or maybe there's something that we could do now that we've explicitly thought about this challenge that we had when we were students. So maybe, should I just start with kind of a short one I have?
Oh, yeah, please.
So one thing that I remember distinctly about my first semester freshman year, I was taking a math class, and I used to really like math, but I wasn't really clicking with this content of math for some reason. It just wasn't inherently interesting to me. I don't know why. It hadn't clicked. Some combination of the material or the way the instructor was into it. And I remember feeling like we had skipped the chapter on applications of like what the applications of this type of math was. And I was so mad about it. And I was like, I can't believe that we skipped the applications chapter. I am dying to know what the applications are. This math seems so like completely unrelated to anything, and why would you ever use it? And here we are skipping the applications chapter. And I told everybody how mad I was about it. And it never occurred to me at all that maybe I could flip through the applications chapter or just like see what some examples were. I knew where it was in the textbook, but that was completely, it wasn't like I thought of it and dismissed it. It didn't cross my mind.
I love that so much. Like, why is this information being kept from me?
Exactly.
This is so crucial. Well, I mean, I love this story because it's really, like, illustrates things where, like, yeah, like, some people are just into the thing for the thing.
Right.
But it is so good to have applications for students. So I think it was a terrible crime that you were kept in applications. But it's just so funny that the chapter is there and you were like, but now I'll never know.
I know. It was right there. I was literally looking at it and like, why would we skip this? Anyway, so my takeaway is like, on the student side, a little reminder, to take initiative, that we can read what we need to read or ask questions about what we need to ask questions about in order to learn the information. And for me, I really needed to know why you would ever need to know this kind of math. And I didn't take any steps.
I also need to know what kind of math it was.
It was linear algebra.
Oh, yeah, no, I could see why that's obscure, for sure.
And I was, like, into calculus, so I felt like I understood calculus as, like, a fun puzzle. You know, you were doing derivatives, you were doing integrals, you were figuring out... And for me, those were fun puzzles. And then we got to linear algebra, and for some reason, that wasn't a fun puzzle just automatically. So I was like, I need to know more. And anyway. But then I was also thinking, so on the instructor end, I think it would have helped me to just hear, hey, feel free. You should look into the textbook if you're feeling like you're missing something. I feel like as small of a line as that is, hearing that would have given me permission and also given me the idea, because I didn't even have the idea of doing that. So I think it's kind of a reminder to myself to tell students something like here's what you could do to get the information. I expect that if you're feeling like you're missing some bit of information, you'll ask me, and or you'll look in the textbook, and or I don't know, whatever I expect. Just like telling them what the options available to them are, and that it's their, it's up to them, and that they can go get that information if they feel like they miss it, and here's how you could do it. So...
That's so... I feel like we could just do literally a whole episode about this story because it's so good. But part of it too then, because I'm guessing from what you said, it was earlier on in your college time.
It was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and because you are so passive at that point. Really
right.
Just like, well, I'm here and you're the expert and like, for some reason you don't think this is important, so I guess it isn't important. And that's something I never ever highlight to students. But like now that you're saying it, there is a question on our university... like evaluations, which is, does the professor encourage you to get other materials or something?
To get materials outside the class. And I never think to do that. I always thought that was a weird question on the evaluation thing. But now I'm seeing a reason. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. What were you going to say about it?
Well, no, just that just like everything you're saying about like, yeah, you can totally ask me. And, you know, just even the idea that like the world is large and we have to edit it down somehow. So I'm making some choices. Mm-hmm. You know,
but that doesn't mean
those things don't exist.
Exactly.
And
that's
the
a really good
chapter's not locked.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love that so much.
Exactly. So, yeah. Chapter 4 is open to everybody, even though we are skipping it.
I just love that you're so anguished and telling everyone about it.
I told a lot of people that I couldn't believe we'd skipped it.
But it is, and then the other side of that, right? In your defense, like you're taking all these classes and you have so much on your plate.
That's true.
You do have to, you know, make pragmatic decisions about, am I going to be examined on this? Otherwise, but it's not worth it in the chapter. Yeah.
So tell us about some of your foibles.
So I think like the biggest things for me was just, I mean, this isn't going to be a surprise to anyone out there listening, but anxiety and stuff. And like, I also, like in some ways through family stuff, it was just assumed this is what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. So I didn't initially feel a great sense of ownership over my education and stuff. And I was very, very focused, kind of just driven by anxiety. So I was very focused on performance rather than the process. Do you know what I mean? So what was I going to get in the exams and that kind of thing. So I kind of took a lot of enjoyment out of it for myself.
I see.
Just from that being my main focus. And I think like all of that stuff really, like, I mean, all of this is really connected, but then like I would never speak in class. I would never ask a question in a million years. Do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't ask a professor for help. Like all of that stuff just felt a bit unseemly, and like it was just embarrassing that I didn't know something and I should figure it out on my own at home. And even something like group work, it was quite rare that we did any group work because, you know, it was back in the day. But, I mean, the Stone Age, but you know what I mean? Some time ago. But it was too embarrassing. Like, I've never understood that the process is part of it. And it was too embarrassing to me to let someone see my process of figuring something out.
So if you didn't have it fully down solid, you couldn't show anybody that you didn't have it fully down solid, even if it had just been presented. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, why don't I know this already? This is mortifying. Do you know what I mean? And so I think like a big thing kind of that led to is like I couldn't start a problem that I didn't know how to finish. Do you know what I mean? So I could never just be like, ooh, what are we doing here? And like, you know, all that stuff where like people are working on a chalkboard together, solving some space problem as back to space me like, in the show where this thing is happening. But I couldn't, and it was awful. It was just such a curse. Yeah. And I worked around it by memorizing everything and being very good at finding problems and learning how to do them. But I really didn't find the joy of like being stuck in a problem and noodling away at it. Do you know what I mean? Because I just like, so that really, and then it just got to a point where the problems were too hard and I couldn't find already work solutions. So then that's when I had to have my reckoning of like figuring out how to do stuff. And I really credit this particular professor in grad school. And it's sort of because he gave us such hard problems. In a way that became like no one could do them and everyone, you know what I mean? So it kind of, that in itself was a bit liberating. And then he really encouraged talking in class and asking questions. And he also, the biggest thing was he shared that he was terrified of asking questions.
Oh, that's great.
And so, and then he said he just, like he went to Harvard or something, and he said that he had almost a day where he was like possessed and just decided to sit down the front in a seminar and just ask all the questions.
Wow.
And it just was great. And then he just never stopped. And so he really encouraged that in class. So
that's a great story. How helpful.
Oh my God. Yeah. And he's the one, I think I've told you this story before, where he had participation credit and I went to his office and I was like, hey, just so you know, like I'm not going to say anything in class, and it's not that I'm not interested. I'm just too shy. And he was like, oh yeah, that's too bad, but you know, tough. You're just going to figure it out. And I was like, what? Sorry.
I love that.
Yeah. And he was just like, nope, you're going to have to, because you can't. And it was the first time anyone had said to me the idea that you can't be a physicist and be silent. Like communication is part of it. And that's not something I would ever. So I went to this event today. I was at an event which was like a national event for school students to come and sort of meet representatives from degree programs at universities. And it was a bit wild. It was very loud and intense. But there was one girl and she was like, I'm really interested in physics. But my mom says because I have such a good way of interacting with people, I shouldn't do something like physics because it's so like isolating.
Okay.
And I was like, whoa. And we had a long conversation about it. And I was like, it really isn't isolating. And all of these things have to happen in big teams and blah, blah, blah. But it's such a pervasive attitude about physics. And like a lot of science stuff that you're like the lone person scribbling away on paper in your room.
Totally,
and stuff. So,
totally.
Yeah. But so I think that's something that I think I've been able to take some of my foibles and sort of bring them into how I teach.
Okay.
And like, I feel like I have not solved my own anxiety problems, but I really try and create a dynamic. I don't know how successful it is. Sometimes it's successful of like, it's okay to make mistakes. We're all going to work on this stuff together. There is no experts. The bit like the ugly sort of behind the scenes factory stuff has to happen in the classroom. Do you know what I mean? It's okay to figure stuff out loud and doing that stuff and really encouraging students. There's so many times when I give out the activity and people are like, oh, I think I'll just do this later at home. I'm like, nope, let's just try it now. And like, and the confidence you get from just having a bash at something, you know, I think that's really important. And I mean, I don't know if it actually is important to everyone, but it's important to the people like me who were like, no, I'll just do this at home quietly by myself. And, you know, so anyway, that's some of my foibles that I think have informed teaching stuff that has worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I love that. It makes sense to me. So you having this intentional group work in class, I mean, that's very similar to this wonderful professor that you mentioned who insists that everybody participates in the class and says, no, you have to. And then it's also ensuring that the students are trying it out. You know, I don't know. I feel like the group work that you're setting up really helps with a bunch of those things that you were saying.
Yeah, and I think like I think the anxiety of the blank page is a real terrifying, scary thing.
Yes.
And just getting into the habit of like, well, I better draw a diagram and I better set my coordinate system and like just having those things to, you know, suddenly you can be halfway through the problem before you've even had the fear hitting you. So yeah.
That's great. I love it.
So tell me more. I love indignant Claire, who's tell us more of her adventures in college.
Okay, sure. So I think my biggest foible in college classes was I would half-ass classes at the drop of a hat. Like,
see, all of this stuff, right, is actually shocking to me. Like everything, even what you said in the last episode, I was like, wait, what? Like, this is... Okay, sorry, tell me more. Tell me everything about half-assing Claire.
Well, so, yeah, it's kind of the same mindset as this We Skip Chapter 4 applications. If the content or the instructor didn't grab me, I just said, well, this was a dumb class, or something like that. Like, I was mad. I blamed the instructor for not making the material more interesting. I blamed the instructor for not setting it up. I blamed the class. I just felt like, well, I don't like this class. This class is dumb. And so what that meant to me, I still came to all the classes. I still handed in all the assignments. I still passed the classes. But maybe I didn't crack.
I do love your version of half-assing. It's like it's still pretty diligent, but yes.
I didn't. Here's where the half-assing comes in. I didn't crack open the textbook to find the answer to homework problems. I would start the problem sets, but as soon as I got stuck, I'd be like, oh well, obviously I wasn't equipped to being able to solve this. This wasn't well done.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I really did blame the class setup and the instructor for not setting me up to be able to just breeze through the homework problems. Like, there were other classes, I think I just clicked better with how chemistry classes were often set up. And so in chemistry, the classes that I took were often, here is a bunch of information and a bunch of potential calculations you might need to do around this information. Go off and do some calculations. And I would really feel equipped to go do the practice problems. Yes, and then maybe I'd get to a more advanced class and maybe it was a little bit harder, but I would have a better idea of like what I needed to know how to do. And if I didn't know how to do it, I would say, oh, okay, I need to do something to get to that level that I already know exists. And maybe like
because you had that feeling. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I knew what it felt like to understand those classes, and I didn't with other classes. So I think, here's what I think the issue was, and it really comes back, it's very similar to the issue I mentioned earlier. I think it's true that they didn't set me up to be able to do the homework, but the only setup issue, I think, was just I didn't understand their expectations of how I was going to go about doing these assignments. Like, I think they probably did expect me to go into the textbook, or to synthesize some information, or to try something new, and I just had no idea. I thought that it should be in my notes, it should have been covered in the material in the class, and if it wasn't, then there was something wrong, and I was going to go do something else, I wasn't going to work on this assignment anymore.
See, this is kind of blowing my mind, because I think, too, I'm really resonating with a lot of this stuff, too, and it really, it speaks to how much you think about clearly conveying information.
It does.
You know what I mean? Because you really do, right? And but I just have so often been in that situation where I'm just like, I literally don't know what you're asking me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have absolutely no idea. And it's happened to me plenty of times as an adult too, where I'm like, no, I don't understand. And it's so hard, I think, for experts sometimes to understand that what they're saying, because you're saying something and it feels so clear.
Right.
But then it's not clear to someone. Mm-hmm. And
Exactly. So I think, I think if they had said something like, you will look up information in the textbook to help you solve these, that would have really helped me. But I don't think it's perfectly reasonable that they didn't say that, So I think my takeaway is, as students, it's really helpful to have some broad idea, that a broad range of possibilities of what you might have to do to solve these problems or do the homework or whatever it is. And it might not be the way that you do it in your favorite classes, but it might be another perfectly good way, and it's worth exploring these other ways. And maybe even ask the instructor, where do they expect you to get the information that you need? How much synthesis is going to be needed beyond what's in your notes to get you going on this problem, just to kind of get you started? Because we've talked about this before, where sometimes students end up diving into the textbook, but really that's not the right spot to go, and where they should, so I think it's a great idea to ask, where is the instructor expecting you to start in terms of finding the information you need to do this assignment? So I think if that's not clear, I would recommend students ask. And then, so then as a faculty member, thinking about it from our perspective, it's really making me feel like it's pretty important to state my expectations of how students are going to approach the assignments. And my favorite teacher from undergraduate, who we interviewed on this podcast, Rachel, she would always say it in the tense like, you will do this, and then you will do that, and then you will get an A on this assignment, and we will move on, or whatever it is. And it was the you will. And I found that really effective as a student. I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'll go do that. That's easy. I'll just do what you said. And I had no trouble in her classes really diving in and working hard on figuring out how to do these problem sets. I think because she explained how I was going to do it. And
do you know what's so interesting about that? Like I think I've talked about on here Escala, like the equity education service thing, but they talk so much about this and really setting out expectations. And there can be a feeling of like, well, then I'm just holding their hand and leading them, you know what I mean? But the thing is, like, what are you measuring? Do you know what I mean? And if it's a class on like detective work or researching, whatever, fine. But like in that case, you obviously learned all of the chemistry and you were demonstrating that you learned all of the chemistry, and yet you just had a really clear roadmap of how to do that.
Exactly.
And it doesn't take anything away from the learning.
Exactly. All I needed to know was that I was going to need to dig around for the information. And as soon as I knew that, I was like, oh, okay, I'll go dig around for the information, you know, but for some reason I needed to be told that.
But that's so true, because if you're looking at the notes and you're like, I don't see this in here, I guess I'm just too stupid to do this assignment. But if it's clear, like, this isn't in your notes and you do have to go find that yourself, then you're like, oh, that's the mission. I need to go find it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's super interesting.
And and I was thinking about, I do kind of do this, like with my self-graded exams, they're take-home exams. I did tell them some of the answers are in your notes and some of them you're going to have to go look for or synthesize some information. And I told them that explicitly, and I was glad to realize that in retrospect, because it feels like that would have helped someone like me doing that take-home assignment.
But that is because you're like, you could just be like, wow, why can't I find this?
Right, it's not in here. I must have missed that day or something, you know? But it wasn't in there. Yeah, exactly. And it also reminds me of students, when I have new students in the research lab, it seems like sometimes they have trouble starting. And
oh my God, yes.
We've talked about this before, and often the issue is they don't really know actually how to begin. You know? And when you go into the lab and you're like, here is the glassware you will take down, and here is this, and like, yes, maybe you could say that's hand-holding, but I think it's actually just equipping them to begin, you know? And once they know that they can take this glassware down and that this is the balance they can use and all that, then they can zoom off. This is what their expectations are of how you're going to solve this problem. Then they're like, oh, okay, let me do that. So I don't know. Anyway.
Right. And then what's the other guy who comes into your lab and is like, I don't need any instruction, and then they're like trashing your lab. Do you know what I mean? So like just knowing, and I think I've also I'm all about my parenting stuff today, but like with my girls, they're really very confident and very like curious about things and everything, but within parameters. Like when they first arrive somewhere, they're like, what are the structures and rules here? And then once they have that, they'll be like wild lunatics running around. You know what I mean? But they need that, like, just what's going on here? Like they need that little assessment time. And I think that's a good characteristic to have.
Totally.
But totally, yeah. So I love that. That's super interesting.
Tell me some more about your foibles.
Okay, so here are some of my foibles that I don't think I do a good job of like addressing with students. So one is just a foible that I still have, and it's not something like, basically it's something, it's, you know when they say sometimes people will annoy you so much with something that is just something you do? Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
like it's the
exactly.
Thing you don't,
if something annoys you, it tells you more about you than about the person being annoyed.
Totally.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just people are jerks or whatever. That's fine. But
of course.
One thing for me is self-deprecation. Annoys me so much. Like so much. And it like almost makes me, like it annoys me on one level because I'm like, you are rejecting this compliment I'm giving you, that I'm giving you as an expert. Okay, not an expert. Now I'm getting anxious about saying I'm an expert. But you know what I mean? If I'm like, you did this problem really well. And they're like, no, I didn't. I'm like, no, listen, I actually telling you a piece of information based on my like professional opinion.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's that. And then the other thing is, I know there is people in my life that I have talked out of taking me seriously. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
By being so self-deprecating. And I went into a situation with them where they thought of me as a professional, reasonable person, and slowly I wore them down and convinced them otherwise. And so I'm like, you stop doing this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, and I just find it drives me nuts. And then I still do it myself.
Interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Does it drive you nuts when you do it? Or just when someone else does it?
Not to the extent as it when other people do it, but when I hear it, I'm like, that's so annoying. And then I'm like, oh God, I still do this. You know what I mean? And
I do know what you mean. That's so funny.
Yeah. And so that, I need to work on not doing it.
I don't have a solution, but everyone always says the first step is awareness. So when you notice that you've done it, even if you already did it, that's still closer to noticing before you did it and then noticing and not doing it at all.
I don't think I've found a way. I think I've joked with students before about like no self-deprecation, or like we'll have a self-deprecation jar or something. But like fundamentally you want to be like, listen, I know that this is a protective part of yourself, right? Because that's what it was for me, was always to make a joke about myself before anyone else would, whatever it was. Sure. And so I think I would like to think and reflect on how to really get through to students.
Yes, that is an interesting question. I did have a semester where I had two students working together in the research lab, and they were both expert self-deprecators. And I thought about, we probably talked about this on the podcast, I thought about having some rule of no self-deprecating, which I was hoping would be funny, you know, like whenever they messed up, I don't know what we would do, but it'd be something funny and it would be practice for them. And it was, you know, so great that there were two of them that could work on this together. I didn't end up doing that, but it does seem like there's something that would be helpful to try to, I don't know, set up some
But then
system.
I'm saying that, like, I'm going to say one thing to them and they're going to suddenly, when I've had a lifetime of being like, oh, I should really stop doing this. So, like, I don't know, Yeah,
sure. You could do it with them, though. You could be also one of the people who's trying to not self-deprecate.
Maybe we could have opposite day, where you have to say the opposite of what you want to say.
Oh,
so you're like, I'm the greatest physicist in the world.
You know,
there has never been anyone.
It does really help to be like, we are specifically having a moment where we're doing this other thing and just kind of trying it out, you know? Not that you would go that far to the other side, but to go that far as practice might help. Anyway, that's a fun idea. I like that idea.
Totally. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to... Next time I'm on the podcast, you'll meet a very different way. I'll be like... Yeah. And the other two things that I was thinking about is, one is I've really always struggled with non-linear learning.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's why physics is appealing to me, because there's chapters and they are in order and there's material building on material, and and that's a reason, like, I've never been able to learn languages very well.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's so, like, you know, just getting into the soup and you're just picking up vocabulary and learning stuff, and I'm like, right, but what is chapter one? You know what I mean? And like, it's just, I really struggle with non-linear things, and I think anything that requires... And it's so weird, right? Because I have experiential knowledge of things, like, say, teaching or whatever, but that makes me so uncomfortable because there's not like a specific pathway of like, we are going to do X followed by Y followed by Z. It's just like... Interesting. And I know there is a lot of structure in how people learn languages, but at some point it is just like... You learn the numbers and the colours, and, you know, and then at some point it's more... amorphous than that, and that makes me really anxious and uncomfortable. So
it sounds very similar to solve this physics problem that's too complicated and doesn't have one that you've done before just like it kind of thing, you know? Yeah,
it totally is that thing, and it's just a matter of like, I can't see the steps, so to me it feels like just total chaos. And totally random.
That makes me think that you're kind of already doing some, like, when you teach the students, hey, you are with a new problem, you should draw a diagram, you should do these 5 things, that is helping them kind of make a linear thing out of some non-linear kind of problem.
Okay.
So I think you're already doing that.
Okay, I like that one. Okay, and then my last one is, I genuinely, and I think this does tie into everything else, I've never known about drafts or editing.
Uh-huh.
The idea
Yes.
that you wouldn't just hammer out the perfect thing immediately is so, like, there was just no part of my being. So one thing, I understood that you had to practice giving talks. Like, I
Okay.
understood that.
Interesting.
But for any lab reports or projects, I never understood that I should give it to someone to read first before I handed it in, or writing a personal statement, or just even the concept. And I think this kind of fits in with the idea of you had to get it right the first time.
You can't
But,
ask
like,
questions. Yeah.
right, or just being like, oh, I just did 3 pages of doing this in the wrong direction, and oh well, here I go, you know,
Right.
or just the process being visible, like, just, it never had occurred to me. And I think I would like to be a lot more specific, and it's just time, but with students about, like, hey, you can hand in this lab report and then you can get feedback and fix it, or, you know, just the idea that this is not, like, even when you submit an academic paper or whatever, you know, there's review processes and you get feedback and, you know, just all of that stuff. So that was just completely alien to me and was never, yeah.
Yeah, it is really interesting how, I mean, yeah, normally we just see the final versions of things out there, and yeah, that is a tough one. And I like your, I mean, yeah, we all had, I mean, did you have this in Ireland too, where you would have assignments for essays or lab reports or something where you had to hand in a draft and then you had to hand in a revision?
No.
You didn't have that. Interesting.
No, and so I think that would have been really helpful.
That might have been helpful, yeah. Even having had that, I still feel like, okay, but, you know, it is tough. I feel like you can't make mistakes on the draft either. So anyway.
Right,
yeah,
totally.
Yeah, I don't know. That feels like the kind of thing we just have to keep reminding ourselves that drafts is okay. What do you think's different about oral presentations that made you feel like it's okay that you have to practice those?
See, I think I acknowledge that, like, I have a fear of public speaking. Do you know what I mean? And it was practicing that. But even I knew, like, oh, sometimes you think things should go in a certain order, and then once you say it out loud, you realize that doesn't make sense. I don't know. I think that because... Maybe also because that was something I never did in school.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And so the first time I did that was in college, maybe, I don't know. But, like, there's something about exams and essays, like, you should just be able to sit down and hammer this thing out straight away. And, like, when you think about, you know, I don't know, do you guys have exams where you have to write essays in the exam?
We did, yeah, like high school and stuff. And that would
Which is wild when you think about the real world of writing.
Sure. I know, I mean, that was really like, this is the specific skill of writing the 5-paragraph essay. You're going to have an intro, you're going to have a conclusion, you're going to have 3 points in 3 paragraphs backed up with evidence. And so it was really just showing that you knew that format. And that's the way I thought about it. My mom explained very clearly to me that we are learning.
Where was your mom when I was learning how to do that?
Yeah,
we should
really
send your mom out in the world and she'll go and tell people.
Definitely.
So
Definitely. Yeah. And I think clearly you can apply the skills from that format to other writing, and so I can see why we all need to know that format of writing.
Oh, for sure. But
it is
the idea of doing just an exam where you have to produce this perfect thing, so I think that just got really set in my mind.
That makes sense.
Just,
that makes sense.
And you don't see enough of people messing stuff up or doing, you know what I mean? Or like...
Yeah, I mean, even like, you know... Yeah, pretty much everything, you know, you see the final version, like you say, you might go 3 pages in the wrong direction with the math, but now you know that's not the direction, and that's huge. But in your final report, where you publish it, you're not going to show the 3 pages of the wrong direction, you're going to say, here's the most simplified version of the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's not enough visibility, so maybe that's something to do with students, is just talking more and more about the process. And the messiness of the process and yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I have very much enjoyed this trip down. I really like meeting College Claire. I want to hear more about College Claire who's like protesting the inaccessibility of chapters and stuff. That's awesome. But again, and it's I bet you would literally have students falling out of their seats if you were like, I had classes that I just was like, whatever, and gave up on. They would literally, no one would guess that in a million years. But it's so relatable, and it's so good to know that that's like,
Yeah. And exactly. It's always good to know, I don't know, everybody has some kind of challenges in everything, but in classes in particular. And so
sure.
That's another thing is the students, it's really easy to think nobody else is having any of these challenges. Everyone else can just do it, but you're not seeing whatever their challenges are. And so it's good to talk about them.
We also, like, in classes, we think, like, classes are just the laws of the universe, when it's really just people making decisions about how they're going to set something up. So even when you're like, I had a really hard time learning solid state physics, but like when you're like, oh, I just can't, maybe it wasn't the material, maybe it's just, you know what I mean? But
right, sure, maybe it was the setup of the class was great for some students, but not great for you for some reason. And yeah, cool.
Well, I feel like we should just do all of the rest of our episodes and all of the stuff we brought up today, because there's a lot of meat in there for sure.
Lots of stuff.
But, that was lovely.
For sure. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.